So we're ready to go, are we?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. I just wanted to make a comment about the song that we've just sung, which was to say that I appreciated the gaps between the words and the verses. Sometimes I think when we sing songs, we rush through them a bit fast. And I actually found it really helpful tonight just to have a verse to sing and then have 10 or 15 seconds to pause and think about what I just sung. So thank you, Howard. That was great. Right, today, 10 Commandments, and we're up to number 10, the final week in our survey. And number 10 says this: you must not covet your neighbour's house. You must not covet your neighbour's wife, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbour. So that's the verse in Exodus that we'll be looking at today. I read a story about this command recently. It was about a man who'd lost his wallet, and he was on his way to report it to the police and to the bank. And as he walked along the road, he came to a church, and in the church there were some really loud and dramatic noises coming from that building. So he was intrigued and he went in to listen. The noise turned out to be a preacher preaching on the 10 Commandments. And the visitor stayed and listened, and after the service had finished, he went up to compliment the preacher and said, "That was a great sermon." "Very kind of you to say so," says the preacher. "In fact," continues our visitor, "it was so good, it completely changed what I was going to do today." "Well, that's remarkable," said the preacher. "How did it do that?" "Well, you read through all the commandments, and finally you got to number 10, thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's wife. And all of a sudden I remembered where I left my wallet." So let's dive in, shall we, and see what this command has to say to us. First of all, I'm going to suggest to you a definition. What does this word covet actually mean? Because as I read through the commandments, I read words like do not kill, do not steal, do not lie. And we may or may not be able to do them fully, but we certainly know what the words mean, don't we? But this word covet is one of those words that's just a little bit strange. And so I'd like to suggest a definition that might help us out. I'm going to call it, for this sermon, misplaced desire. And the moment we think about things that get misplaced, my mind goes immediately to my escapades week by week on the golf course, because I'm very good at misplacing objects on a golf course. I was reminded of a very pleasant afternoon I had with my son last Thursday. He invited me a couple of weeks ago to join him for 9 holes celebrating Father's Day. So that was a nice treat. And normally I play out at Waitakere, but that was a bit hard for him to get to straight after work. So we went to a golf course called Pupuki on the North Shore. And when you play golf on a new course, you very quickly learn new meanings to this word misplaced. I'm visualizing at the moment hole number 1, which is a par 4. That means a good golfer will take 4 shots to get in the hole. And I was doing reasonably well. I hit my first 2 shots and I was just next to the green, and the green was way up there. It was one of those greens on a hill with banks all around it. And so my third shot was chipping up onto the green, and I managed to do that reasonably well. And I was only 10 feet away from the hole, thinking, for a person of my standard, this is going to be a really good result on the first hole. How pride comes before a fall. When you putt on a green, a good golfer will think to themselves, there'll be 2 kinds of putts. There'll be the short putts and the long putts. Short putts are the putts that you should expect to get in pretty much every time. The long putts are far enough away that you might get them in once in a while, but mostly you won't. But what you'll do with your long putts is you'll get them close enough to the hole so that the second putt is always a guaranteed putt. That's the way you should play. So here am I 10 feet from the hole thinking, just get it close enough to get the next one in. No sweat. What I didn't know was that the greens at Pupuki bear absolutely no resemblance to the greens at Waitakere. And I played a Waitakere strength putt, which certainly went the 10 feet, but it didn't stop there. It went another 10 feet and another 10 feet. And by this stage, it had reached the edge of the green and it literally rolled all the way down the bank. And I walked over to the edge of the green and looked down at it and thought, that looks very familiar. That looks very much like where I was 2 shots ago, having gone all the way back down to where I'd started from. So that for me is a picture of misplacement on a grand scale. And there are lots of ways on a golf course that you can do that. The only good thing about the round was standing on the edge of the green while my son Grant played his putt following mine and ended up in exactly the same place as I was. So there you go. The joys of being able to get your kind of comfort from seeing the misfortune of someone else. I'm not sure if that's a good or bad thing, but that's where I was in that moment. Misplaced desire. At its ideal, a golf shot, if you hit it sweetly, it will go exactly where you intend it to go. If you mishit it, it's going to go all over the place. It's going to be disaster. Coveting is misplaced desire. And the whole picture here is that desire by itself is an entirely natural and healthy thing. I might desire to get a job. I might desire to play sport better. I might desire to pass an exam or learn how to drive a car. I might desire to improve the quality of my relationships with my family, with my work colleagues. All of these are perfectly good and honourable things. In fact, if we never had any desires, that itself would be the unnatural state, wouldn't it? That would be apathy. That would be a bad thing. But just because our desires are natural, it doesn't mean that the way we express them is going to be a neutral expression. This command warns us that the desires that we have, if we're not careful, we can seriously misplace them, misdirect them, and cause great harm to other people. Let's look at some practical examples. Think about leadership for a moment. Leadership and influence is a good, natural part of life, isn't it? A leader who leads well is someone to be admired and honoured and followed. So if I have leadership skills and I want to exercise them, that's what my desire, that's a good thing. But we very well know from comparing this picture, perhaps with the next picture, that leadership can be a good or bad result.
Which one's the bad?
Exactly. Okay. I, in my mind, have a picture of Queen Elizabeth and all the comments that I've heard, thousands of them, over the last 10 days or so. Can you think of one bad thing that has been said about Queen Elizabeth? And yet other people in other places of leadership, we may have various opinions on these two. It's just, my focus is not on them in particular, but just to show that in the realm of leadership, there are people who lead by doing good to others, who serve, who are humble, who care about the welfare of the people that they lead. And there are other people that we know who we choose to put in that category might be different for different people, but we think about people that we know whose leadership is entirely selfish. It's entirely about getting up on the pedestal so I can be honoured and I can be respected and I want to hang on to power at all costs. And the way I lead can be incredibly destructive to other people. What about the desire for food? Having a great meal together is a core part of life at 126, isn't it? And enjoying food is fine. Wanting to eat good food is fine. But what if the first people in the queue pile up their plates so high that the last people in the queue, when they get to the table, there's nothing left for them? A simple example of how our desires can lead us into causing harm to other people. What about our work situations? What if you were part of a team organising a project, a presentation for a client, and you made a suggestion that turned out to be a great suggestion for that client, but the leader of your project team took all the credit for it? How would you feel about that? What if you visit a friend's home and see flash jewellery on the table, or a Mercedes or Rolls-Royce car, spotless, sitting in the driveway? How do we handle the feeling that wells up? The voice says, I wish I had stuff like that. What about this panel? It's the ivory trade. Take a moment to read some of those statistics. I give my wife permission not to read them. She's not a numbers person. That's okay. On average, one elephant in Africa is killed by poachers every 25 minutes. The overall African elephant population plummeted by more than 20% in a 10-year period, falling to an estimated 415,000. That statistic is quite interesting when you consider that the experts tell us 200 years ago there were 26 million elephants in Africa. Between 1979 and 1989, half of all Africa's elephants were lost to the ivory trade. The international trade in illegal ivory is estimated to be worth $17 billion each year. In the 4 years up to 2014, the wholesale price of raw ivory in China tripled, reaching $2,100 per kilo. What are the things we use ivory for? We use them for items such as the tops of keyboard, keys on pianos. Piano keys historically were made of ivory. I don't know if they are these days, but that's what they were made for. They were used to make billiard balls for pool tables. They're currently used in Japan, which is one of the main countries that has a demand for ivory, to make special calligraphy pens that the Japanese people use for their writings. Our demand for billiard balls and calligraphy pens is potentially killing off all the elephants in the world. Coveting nice things can be incredibly destructive. And this is the picture that we need to understand when we read this command. Our desire for things that harm other people and harm the world around us. That's what this command is warning us against. Incredibly important. I want to take a moment just to read two Bible passages to you, two sides of the coin when it comes to desire, the bad story and the good story. So this is from James chapter 4. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire but do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. What stands out in those verses? for me, it's that James here is talking about conflict in life, fights, quarrels, arguments, and this very practical writer says the outward conflict actually doesn't start there. It all starts on the inside. It starts with the desires that battle within us. That's the word that he uses. It's the image of a powerful civil war that's going on in our lives, each of us. And we all understand that, don't we? Where we have choices to make. And we have to wrestle about what's right and what's wrong and what we should do in a particular situation. If you desire something but you can't get it, that desire has the potential to be so strong that it causes you to hurt others in order to get what you want. And why is it, says James, that you don't have these things? He says a very profound thing, which I invite you to reflect on for a moment. He says this: you do not have because you do not ask God. And then in the next sentence, when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. Now, I've heard sermons on that part of this verse in the light of the way in which we should pray. And certainly this is about prayer, because he's talking about prayer. So prayer is an element, but it's really important that we understand that prayer is not the important thing in this conversation. Prayer is simply one more example of an outward expression of what's going in here. So in the same way as if two people fight because they both want the same thing, the fighting is a picture of the inward desire. And what James is saying here about prayer is that our prayers are also an outward picture of what's going on inside. If I spend all my time praying to God to satisfy my personal pleasures, I'm just trying to manipulate God in the same way as I try to manipulate other people to get what I want. And so it's not about the prayer, it's about the picture of what prayer signifies in terms of our attitudes towards life and our desire to get what we want. Sobering thoughts, aren't they? Here's the second reading. Here's something a bit more positive. It gives us a picture of what, as Christians, we should be aiming for. This is from Psalm 37, and it says this: don't worry about the wicked or envy those who do wrong, for like grass, they soon fade away. Like spring flowers, they soon wither. Trust in the Lord and do good. Then you will live safely in the land and prosper. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you your heart's desires. There's that word again, desires, but this time in a much more beautiful context. Commit everything you do to the Lord, trust him, and he will help you. He will make your innocence radiate like the dawn, and the justice of your cause will shine like the noonday sun. And who doesn't want that? Don't worry about the wicked, says the psalm writer. Don't envy them. Envy is just another word for coveting. Don't covet their status. Don't covet the Putins and the Trumps of this world. Why? Because like the grass, they will soon fade away. Apart from God, nothing lasts forever. Instead, trust in the Lord and do good. That's how we prosper. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you your heart's desires. And I invite you to see a twofold meaning in that sentence. God will give you your heart's desires. The first part of that idea is that he actually gives us the desires that are in our heart. So if I desire to love my wife more, where did that desire come from? The psalmist is saying that that desire itself comes from God. God is the one who makes me want to do good things in the first place. So the desire to be like Jesus, the desire to help other people and to put their needs before my own, the desire to love God and spend time with him. These are brand new desires which God himself plants like seeds in our heart and in our spirit, driving out the old selfish desires. That's the picture that the psalm writer wants you to see here. And then the second half of that verse, he will give you the desires of your heart. God promises to actually bring to fruition the seeds that he's planted. So not only do you now have the new desire to do something good instead of something bad or harmful, God will help you to achieve the desires that are growing in your heart. We will indeed start to care more about others. We will indeed start to spend time with God. The promise here is that God will give us both the healthy desires and the strength to live them out. There's a fantastic verse that Paul writes in Philippians, which I invite you just to reflect on for a moment as we finish here. From Philippians 2, Paul says, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. God is at work in us. That's what Paul is saying. God is at work in us. And it's a twofold work. Firstly, he's at work in us to will. That means to become willing to do good. That's what that word means. And then secondly, to act. In other words, to act out the desires that we now have in our heart. And all of this is to bring about God's purposes, God's beautiful purposes for our lives. One translation puts it like this: for God is working in you, giving you both the desire and the power to do what pleases him. Psalm 37, he will give you the desires of your heart. So that's the positive. We have seen the sobering pictures that remind us at its worst, our inward human desires can take us in some tragic directions which cause great harm to other people. But as we allow God to work and birth a new spirit in us, we can discover the desires to be like Jesus and to follow God. That will start to blossom in our lives and become more and more real as we go through our life, following and trusting in him. Let's pause there for a moment. I'm going to bring up a discussion question, which we'll explore together for a few minutes. It says this: sometimes we act kindly and sometimes we act hurtfully. It's the reality of life, isn't it? What do you think motivates us to behave this way? So take 5 or 10 minutes in your tables to have a chat about that question.
Well, I didn't have to do it.
You did it. You did it. You restrained well. Sometimes we act kindly. Sometimes we act hurtfully. What do you think I think very much it comes down to the times when we actually keep our own selfish reasons. We can be very tempted to act hurtfully. The times when we actually have our minds to everybody else and worrying about everybody else in the community. But it does depend how much skin in the game you've got.
I wonder if we don't all have mixed motives all the time. You know, it's, I mean, I may really want to be doing it for God's glory, but there's always a little piece of me that when I act for me, give the other person good
David.
you know, there's always a little corner. Yes, right, yeah. Perhaps it's only me. I don't think my emotions are ever 100% pure.
I think you might be surprised.
And even when we act virtually, I mean, sometimes, yeah, I mean, often it's just our own. We act virtually, sometimes we feel to ourselves. And it's not that we are not always out to the of course. Yeah. So, the very first at my birthday party, my oldest friend, and Bob was my MC, and Bob was a really lovely kind of things about right, but it was kind of things said in his role as MC, you know, which kind of put out these stories and do your service and stuff. I think when it's time people just to, you know, share the mic and say stuff about me, he kind of offered the mic to his wife. He was like, oh wow, I wasn't prepared. I was sort of deer in the headlights. And so the mic went away. And well, I suppose I was a bit kept by it. And one of my oldest friends in the room couldn't think of something to say on the spot. And so afterwards, as we were chatting, I made some kind of reference to her deer in the headlights moment, which made her feel better. And so because I had felt bad, I made her feel better. And the next day I got this thing of, oh, Helen, I'm so sorry. And, you know, yeah, of course, you know, I think you're wonderful and all this stuff. And then I had to apologize. Right. And then I had to apologize because I had made a thing like that, where I could just be gracious to do what I did. It was very mean of me. It wasn't kind. But so much of what we do that isn't because we are just me. I mean, sometimes we are, but often it's really something that's making us feel the way we're feeling. So it's always a communication. Because often there's more to it there. It's not so simple.
Old men, and old men's pretty touchy. But the new man, it's all overall, but the new man, the vice within our being, he's not affected by sort of stuff. So I guess the more price we have, the less this is going to affect us. But we've all got that old nature, unfortunately.
As we go on in the faith, we should be getting sweeter and more gracious.
Yeah.
As we let, you know, Jesus shine through us. Then just once in a while.
I thought it was rather curious that over Amazon we have 4,000 Christians all meeting and have one theatre one afternoon. There was more elbowing, shoving, pushing. I thought, what did they say about us? You've been so jostled and pushed around. No, but